meeting.
Okay.
Okay, and Kendra, I don't know if typically, because this is really my first attendance at the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting as a co-chair. Do we normally do introductions or, I mean, I think we all know each other more or less.
I think it's nice to know who's on the call and we can introduce everybody and we can call the meeting to order. It's 5:32.
Okay, right. So I will call the meeting to order at 5:32. So Kendra, you want to start with introductions?
Yeah, I'm Kendra. I'm one of the board member and also co-chair of the Finance and Facilities committee.
Martine LaRoque-Ulick, one of the other co-chairs, the other co-chair of the Finance and Facilities Committee. Nathan, want to go next?
Sure, I'm Nathan Lavery. I'm the district's executive director of finance and operations.
And
Marty.
Marty Spalding. I'm the director of property services. I'll turn it over to Joe.
Joe Wythe with White Burke Real Estate Advisors, working with the district on the new high school and tech center.
Rachel, do you want to go?
Sure.
Oh, sorry, I was going to have Rachel
Oh, I'm sorry.
introduce herself real quick. If she can unmute. Otherwise, Bob could go. Or Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison. I'm following this for 7 days.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you.
I'm Bob Church. I'm a teacher at Burlington Tech Center.
Thanks, Bob. And I believe Rachel Mann is also a journalist, if I'm not mistaken.
Rachel, can you unmute or?
Maybe she stepped away from her computer.
Okay.
So with no further delay, why don't we jump right into the content of our meeting? And Nathan, I believe you wanted to go ahead and speak.
Yeah, so we'll do a quick introduction. So the first and the major item for tonight is the discussion of the BHS BTC project and where things stand. So we have Joe Wythe, our real estate consultant here from White Burke, to provide a pretty in-depth summary of kind of the work that has occurred to date and where we stand. For those who may not have checked board docs recently, all of the documents are available on board docs right now. So Joe's going to talk about some of those documents, but if you want to follow along at home, they are posted on the board docs website under the finance committee's agenda. So
Can I stop you for 1 second, just to be
yeah.
sure that we don't have public comment, because we should just be sure we have no public comment and we can open it closed. So if anyone does want to speak at public comment, if you could just raise your hand. Looking as there is none, then I will officially close public comment. Just wanted to be sure we got that in. Thanks.
Great. Okay. And then so with that, why don't I turn it over to Joe? Waste no more time here and we'll get rocking. Hi, Joe.
All right, great, thank you. Yeah, so tonight, what I'd like to do is to provide an update on the work that we've been doing since the board decided to advance 3 sites to the next phase of feasibility assessment. And the 3 sites include the Institute Road North site, the Institute Road South site, and the Gateway block. And since that meeting, God, I can't remember when that was, but probably 6 weeks ago, maybe, we went ahead and assembled a development design team consisting of an architectural firm, civil engineers, as well as an environmental consultant to help us further assess these 3 sites. And the work has involved, preparing some very preliminary, site plans and building massing diagrams just to really get an idea of whether, a 275,000 to 300,000 square foot building could fit on each of the sites along with parking. And then the engineers have been doing some preliminary site engineering assessments, really just to try and identify whether or not there's any significant development or permitting issues that we should be aware of. So tonight I'd like to just give you an update on where we are with that and just highlight some of the key findings so far. But what I'd like to do is just start with showing you each of the very conceptual site plans and then just talk about each one of those. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Institute Road North. Okay, all right, so can you see that plan? Okay,
Yes,
so
we can see it. Great. And then just to clarify for folks, the north side is the side on which the current, major parking lot and buildings are located, correct?
that is correct. That is correct. So just to orient you on this site plan here, here's North Avenue out here. And then this is Institute Road heading west. We've got the existing parking lot on the south side with the baseball field. And then this is the north side where the existing buildings are located. So this concept plan shows a roughly 300,000 square foot building fitting on the site entirely in the area to the east of the existing building. So between the existing buildings and North Avenue. With a new parking lot being constructed in the area of the demolished and abated buildings, and then continuing to use the parking lot on the south side. So this again is just very preliminary. A disclaimer the architects asked me to put out there is that these are not intended to be detailed design or conceptual design drawings of any sort. No floor plans are being considered, no elevations or cross sections, anything like that. It's really just more of a massing diagram to see if we can fit a building of that size on the site. And if so, roughly what kind of configuration could it potentially look like? I mean, there's many options that really could happen here, but this particular one shows this 300,000 square foot building, which would be, mostly 3 stories with a couple areas of 2 stories. And again, it shows it all in that area outside of the existing buildings, which, one of the benefits here is that it could conceivably allow construction of, a lot of this building or a portion of this building to go on at the same time the existing buildings are being demolished and remediated. So that helps from a timing perspective. So this plan could accommodate all programs with a building of that size. And it also assumes a 30% increase in the amount of square footage for BTC compared to what they formerly had at this location. So there is some expanded space there. Total number of parking spaces are about 340, which meets the the 325 space minimum that had been suggested previously by the district. Building height is estimated to be 45 feet. An important thing to point out here, again, is the zoning. I think we've had this discussion in the past. The zoning of this property is very restrictive. It allows only 35-foot high buildings, doesn't allow school use, and allows only 5% lot coverage. So this is, the existing high school is a non-conforming situation. And, I guess the philosophy of the zoning department is that, as long as you don't increase the degree of conformity, we should be fine as far as getting our local zoning approvals. So if we can stay below the existing building height of 50 feet, that's probably good. And if we can stay close to around 33 to 35% total lot coverage, we're probably fine there. If we need to exceed those, it'll be a little bit trickier as far as having to convince the zoning board, or the DRB, I should say, that those larger lot coverages or larger building heights are needed to serve the functions of a 21st century educational facility. So, but it would be more of a fight to try and get that approval. So if we can stay under those thresholds, that's better. And this building does so far. Estimated lot coverage is about 35%. The architects pointed out that this large open site allows for good access to sunlight and window ventilation in this plan. Some of the development issues that I want to highlight, I'll begin with stormwater. Our stormwater consultant recommends that we utilize the primary system being newly constructed gravel wetlands, similar to what was proposed before with the earlier high school expansion plan. And they believe that there's sufficient area on the site to accommodate all of the stormwater wetlands that will be needed. Another thing I think it's important to point out is that there was a recent rule change, stormwater rule change, that requires pre-existing properties with 3 or more acres of impervious area to upgrade all of their stormwater facilities to current standards. And the high school falls into that category. So even if we weren't redeveloping this site, or if you choose to develop the high school in another site, the district or the city is still going to have to upgrade stormwater on this property to meet this 3-acre rule. So one of the benefits of developing on this site, or maybe even the south site, is that you can do all of the stormwater improvements as part of one project, address all the new impervious area as well as all of the pre-existing impervious area, which would be more efficient and probably cost a little bit less than doing 2 separate projects. So that's going to need to be done. In terms of geotechnical, there's not a lot of information regarding geotechnical that's going to need to be analyzed, but based on some of the information that we have, our geotechnical consultant thinks that there might be some clay soils in this area, which aren't good for construction. They're not good for big buildings like this, but he doesn't believe it will be significant. So that's a good thing. But the whole geotechnical issue is going to require a lot more further analysis just to make sure everything is pretty normal from a geotechnical standpoint. Utilities, no significant concerns with water or sewer service in this area, so that's good. Some of the water lines will likely need to be replaced because they're old and corroded, but again, nothing extraordinary related to that. Environmental contamination, our consultant did do an assessment based on current information, and for this area of the site, urban soils have been confirmed, so those are going to have to be dealt with, and any urban soils that need to be removed will have to go to a certified landfill, which can be costly, but that's going to be the case with any site we develop in the city. But they're pretty confident that there aren't any PCBs, asbestos, or lead in building materials or indoor air in this area of the site, since there's no history of buildings in the area. Traffic and transportation, no significant traffic concerns with this site because we're not really envisioning any increase in traffic. And that was already pretty much studied as part of the past approval. And then we also believe that there's enough distance along Institute Road away from the intersection here to allow for efficient and safe student drop off and vehicle queuing. So traffic doesn't, we're not thinking it's going to be a significant issue. And then a couple of other items to point out. Because this area has a large amount of open space on both the north side and the south side, we believe construction staging and sequencing of material delivery and storage is going to be much more, is going to be pretty simple, which relates to a quicker project timeline and lower cost. And also we think that constructing a typical 2 or 3 story type building will again simplify the construction parameters, which results in a relatively lower construction cost and reduced schedules. So those are some of the highlights with this site. And are there any questions about that before I move to the south side?
Not a question, but I just want to point something out, Joe, if I can.
Mm-hmm.
So as Joe mentioned, the reason why this particular concept is shown to be east of the existing high school is primarily so that for the phasing schedule to construct the building, because we know that it's going to take 2 years to demo the old building. But I don't want people to get confused and think that we can't build where the current building is. It's going to take you 2 years to demo with that. So it makes more sense to start work sooner.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously more level ground over there as well. But I know lots of people have made the mistake to think that we can't build on the current site. So I just want to point that out.
Yeah, and that, and if this site is chosen, that would all be, fully vetted as part of the conceptual design process and further refined. Okay.
Thanks, Marty, for reiterating that. Appreciate it.
And then, here's some cross sections you can take a look at your leisure if you want to kind of see how the building steps down from North Avenue heading west. Okay, so here's the concept plan for a new building on the south side. And, the site is definitely tighter. There's less room there, which is reflected in this plan. But this shows, again, a 300,000 square foot building, which would accommodate all programs for the high school and tech center. And it includes that 30% increase in BTC space compared to what they formerly had at the location across the street. Parking spaces are estimated to be about 322, so pretty much meets the 325 minimum desired by the district. And that parking would consist of, retaining this parking lot that's on the south side. This would also serve as the student drop-off area. And then also retaining the existing parking lot on the north side, and then building a smaller new parking lot in the area of the demolished and abated buildings across the street. Building height is similar, 45 feet. So it's complying with that 50-foot threshold that we're trying to work with. Lot coverage here is a little bit more, they're estimating 35 to 40%. So, an argument's going to have to be made that that's really needed to serve the functions of this use. And then similar to the north side, this large site allows for good access to sunlight and window ventilation. In regard to stormwater, the consultant is recommending a combination of treatment options and detention options. Primary would be installation of underground infiltration chambers, I think roughly in this area. I can't remember exactly what they were saying. And then also installation of a large above-ground infiltration system on the south side of the site. Because the soils are good over here to allow infiltration into the ground. The main parking area, the existing parking area and the new parking area on the north side will require construction of some gravel wetlands. And like the other site, we're going to have to address the 3-acre permit rule. Fix all of the pre-existing impervious area. And one other thing is that there's a possibility that the underground chambers here might require construction of a new pipe, underneath the track over to the outfall in this area. And that will, of course, disturb use of this while that's all being constructed and repaired. Geotechnical, there's even less information about the soils on this side of the site than on the north side. So that's all going to have to be fully analyzed to determine the suitability of the soils to support foundations and buildings of this size. However, there is belief that there is extensive fill in this area, which is likely not suitable for supporting foundations. So our belief is that that's either going to have to all be excavated and removed and replaced with good construction soils, or deeper foundations will need to be installed. But all that relates is to higher construction cost for the project. It's doable, but more expensive. Utilities are the same as the north side. Really no issues with existing water sewer service. Environmental contamination is expected to be the same as the northeast side. Urban soils definitely will need to be addressed, and then they're not expecting there to be any kind of PCBs or asbestos or lead based on the age of the buildings. I guess there is a potential for asbestos in some of these existing buildings, but they think it's very unlikely. And if there is, it's probably going to be very minimal and not costly to take care of. Transportation issues are the same as what I described for the north side. And then also just the construction phasing or sequencing and storage of materials and so forth is still good, similar to the north side, which again relates to quicker construction timeline and lower costs dealing with those issues. Just a couple of other points here is, access to the site is definitely trickier. This plan shows, possibly constructing a new bus turnoff area off of North Avenue onto the site, and then a new driveway and an access road would need to be constructed to provide access for emergency vehicles and deliveries to the back of the building. And again, these additional curb cuts on North Avenue are going to require further traffic analysis, which adds time and cost. Anything you want to add, Marty or Nathan, for this scheme?
Not for me. Thank you, Joe.
Joe, I have a quick question, and it may just be, semantics here, but you just mentioned delivery to the back of the building through that access road. And I guess in my mind, I was thinking that would actually be the front of the building, or am I just?
Yeah, I believe the front is envisioned to be in this area.
Okay.
Off the parking lot that's up higher. Because this would be the area where I think the main entrance would be, the auditorium, gymnasium, and this would be kind of the student drop-off area to get into the high school. So this, I believe, is considered the back portion of the high school.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to, oh, did that wrong. Let's do, I'm using share. I want to do a new share. Okay, so let's move on to the gateway block. Okay, so the gateway block, they developed two schemes. The first one assumes retaining and renovating both Memorial Auditorium and the fire station and using those as part of the school. And then the second scheme assumes demolishing Memorial Auditorium and building a new building on top of it, on top of that piece of property, but still retaining and renovating the fire station. So this first scheme, shows retaining Memorial Auditorium, and that's this area right here. And then the fire station is in this kind of greenish color over here. But this building would be a total square footage of about 251,000 square feet, of which 17,000 of that would be devoted to private ground floor commercial space. In this area, kind of the southwest corner of the building fronting on Main Street and South Winooski. I think we've talked about in the past that the private landowner who owns the old motel property and the residential duplex building, has said that, for them to partner in this development and donate their land, they would want to build and retain about 15 to 17,000 square feet of commercial space. So this leaves only about 234,000 square feet that would be devoted to the school use. And this plan also assumes shared use of the Fletcher Free Library. This building would not be able to accommodate all programs of BTC, namely aviation, automotive repair, and some other building trades. The architects felt it would be difficult to provide those programs and have access to those programs in this kind of dense downtown development project. And they also felt that they would likely be inappropriate uses for a dense downtown because of potential noise impacts on neighboring properties and so forth. So those, we're assuming that those programs would need to be located off-site in a more appropriate location. And it's also unclear as to whether or not the remaining BTC space could be expanded compared to what they formerly had, just because there isn't a lot of square footage available in this development scheme. So not all programs would be accommodated in this gateway block project. Parking spaces would be provided in one level of underground parking, which would be, which would be mostly in this area of the project. We couldn't put underground parking underneath the existing Memorial Auditorium. And we're estimating only about 130 spaces. So far short of the district's desired 325 spaces. Building height is estimated to be about 85 feet with 7 stories fronting on South Winooski and 5 stories fronting on South Union. And that complies with the zoning ordinance. I just can show you just a kind of a quick cross section, just kind of showing how this could potentially look. And again, these aren't intended to be floor plans. I don't think they would actually recommend that the technical center be on the upper floors, but they just wanted to show all the space and how it could potentially be accommodated on the site. So They show retaining Memorial Auditorium and then adding, 7 stories, up to 7 stories on the west side of the site with 1 level of underground parking. And then, the section of the building just north of the auditorium could have a few stories of program space facing on South Union Street. I'm going to jump to the next plan before I get into some of the development issues. Okay, so this is scheme 2, which assumes demolishing Memorial Auditorium and building new. Total building square footage is much larger. They're estimating about 371,000 square feet, of which 354,000 would be devoted to the high school use, and the 17,000 to the commercial space. This plan includes new library space within the building, so it wouldn't be sharing space with Fletcher Free Library. The assumption was also made, even with this plan, that some of the BTC programs would not be included: aviation, automotive repair, maybe some other building trades, which would need to be located off-site. But the remaining space for BTC could likely be increased at 30% because there is sufficient space in the overall building size. Let's see, parking spaces would be provided in 2 levels of underground parking, which would extend all the way from South Winooski to South Union. And they're estimating about 225 spaces. Again, still short of the 325 desired by the district. Building height 85 feet, 6 stories fronting on South Winooski, 4 stories on South Union. So a little bit lower than the other scheme because they can take advantage of the additional footprint where Memorial Auditorium was. And then as far as, okay, and then getting into some of the development issues.
Joe, before you get into that, can I
Yep.
just comment? So the reason why they're looking at 2 concepts with Memorial and without Memorial is because both the fire station and Memorial Auditorium are on the state historic registry or whatever. So we would have to get confirmation from the historical preservation to demolish either one of those buildings. We don't believe we'd be able to make a case to demolish the fire station, but it's likely that it's potential that we could make a case to demolish Memorial Auditorium, mostly because of the issues that are going on with the building, which is all the internal structural steel has been compromised. So it's pretty hard to address those issues without demolishing the building. But that case would have to be made to the historical preservation, and we obviously haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
And Joe and everyone, I just want to make sure that we're staying on time. I believe we're adjourning at 6:30 tonight, so we probably have about 10 more minutes to devote to this, hopefully.
Okay, all right, so let me I'll just jump to some of the key issues here. A big issue from both a stormwater point of view and also utility point of view and geotechnical is this historic ravine sewer we've talked about that runs through the middle of the site. This sewer, there used to be a very large ravine here many years ago, I don't know, maybe in the 1800s, was filled in to allow for development, filled in with very poor soils, and they built this very large underground pipe made out of bricks and cobblestones, and that still exists today. And the city has, the DPW has indicated to us that they would not allow a building to be constructed over that combined sewer line, and that they are going to push for that to be relocated and reconstructed off the site. So it would be probably have to go down College Street, down South Winooski towards Main Street, and then past Main Street somewhere, and then reconnected with other combined storm sanitary sewers in the city. That's a very, very expensive and time-consuming project that's going to have to be dealt with. There's a significant amount of engineering analysis and study that's going to have to be done to determine the proper design and how it could be accommodated further downstream. And, you know, it's unknown what that cost is going to be. And it's unknown who's going to have to pay for it. You know, DPW has indicated that that project is not currently on the city's capital improvement program, so it would be on the developer to have to pay that cost. I will, you know, let you know that the city is actually working on updating its TIF district, its downtown TIF district, and they're updating the capital improvement projects. And they're considering maybe including this project in the TIF district so that it, you know, could potentially get paid for through TIF funding. But again, that is unknown at this time. It's going to be a long process to get through that, and it's going to require, you know, approval by the appropriate state agency, the city, and eventually the voters. But that's a huge issue that's going to have to be dealt with that adds significant cost and uncertainty to developing this site. Related to that is the soils that were used to fill that in. You know, most likely horrible soils that would not support a building of this size. So those are likely going to have to be removed and replaced with suitable soils, or you know, the project is going to have to, you know, the other potential opportunity is to drive steel girders all the way down to bedrock and support the foundation on those. In either case, very expensive, very time consuming to address that issue. There's also clay soils expected on the site, which again has similar construction problems, again adding to time and cost. And then there's environmental contamination. Our consultants, you know, expect that there's, you know, definitely urban soils. They're going to have to be dealt with, you know, probably in worse shape or more than what we have over on Institute Road. And they expect there to be PCBs, asbestos, and lead in the building materials of Memorial Auditorium and the fire station. So we don't know what the extent is or what the cost to remediate is going to be, but they do believe that the cost will likely be less than the cost to remediate Institute Road because there's fewer buildings involved and you know, a smaller amount or less square footage involved. Marty raised the issue of historic preservation. That's another unknown and uncertainty as to whether or not we're going to be able to get approval to demolish the building. You know, so that increases risk and uncertainty. And then finally, you know, construction is going to be much more challenging in a downtown urban environment. Very little land for staging and material storage and so forth. So that adds to time and cost. There's going to be multiple stakeholders involved that we're going to have to negotiate with, the private landowner, the city, again, adding time and cost to developing this site. And then finally, you know, the fire station. If we're going to use the fire station in this project, you know, first we're going to have to get the city to approve for that, which we think they will, because they've been talking about relocating this fire station for a while. But that's going to take a lot of time to find a new location, secure that location, build a new fire station. So the phasing is going to have to be done where the fire station probably isn't used for a number of years or further out, you know, after the other parts of the buildings have been constructed and occupied. So a lot more complex development issues with this site, and we expect it to be, you know, significantly more costly to develop and definitely will take more time than developing Institute Road.
Joe, thank you. I think you did a great job of sharing the potential of this space as well as the challenges. And I personally will not ask any questions tonight because I know this is just a first go around. Does anyone have any pressing queries that they would like to put forth? Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Martine. I'm sorry I missed the first half. I'm very eager to see the link to the recording of it so I can watch the first half.
Yes, and all the documents are posted on board docs as well.
Wonderful. Will you be able to circulate, or maybe Claire already said she would, but would somebody be able to circulate the link to the recording of this? And forgive me if that's a stupid question.
Absolutely, will do.
Thank you.
So does anyone have any questions for Joe at this time? Otherwise, I think we'll move on to the next piece of our agenda.
Can I make one other point if nobody has any questions?
Of course, Marty.
Thank you. I'll be quick. So the other thing I want to point out is if we are not building a school on 52 Institute Road, then we're likely going to need some supporting facility there for our athletic complex, because currently even the locker rooms are in the existing high school. So if we're building somewhere else, we're going to need something there to at least support locker rooms with the athletic field.
There being Institute Road.
Good point, Marty. Thank you for making it. Anyone else have any pressing questions? Otherwise, we will move on to the finance and facilities update with some brief updates on the status of the audit, the budget development, and the facilities access at Institute Road.
Great, thank you. And I'll just to reiterate for anyone else who joins later, watch the video, the information that Joe presented tonight is available on the board docs link for agenda for this committee meeting. Okay, so I did want to take a few minutes today to provide a few updates on various finance and facilities items that are not our BHS BTC project, but also pretty important. One is to provide a brief status update on our FY21 financial audit. That's the audit of the fiscal year that ended on June 30th. We are fortunately, despite we were a little behind due to some turnover we had at the business office in terms of getting it off the ground, but we are now kind of off and running in that process. We actually will have one of our auditors on site this week to do some work, and our new business manager, Katie Glover, is taking the lead on that project. So I think we're going to make up a lot of ground pretty quickly, and that is important for a few different reasons. Obviously, the audit as an annual event is one of the ways that the board can monitor the district's financial health overall. So that's important, obviously. And then specifically, it's also important as part of the budgeting exercise, because the audit gives us a sense of how we ended last year and what type of money we potentially have left over that can be put towards supporting the development of the FY23 budget. So that estimate doesn't have to wait until the audit is completely buttoned up. Needs to wait long enough. That kind of assessment needs to wait long enough that we are confident it's not going to change dramatically. But we don't have to have the whole thing kind of signed, sealed, and delivered. So I usually try to get that out as early as I can, just because it is a useful piece of planning information as we build the budget. And that kind of segues to my second point, which is just an update on budget development. The board's heard about the equitable budgeting process that we are going through this year, and principals have already kind of hit the ground running with that. They're doing great work, more of it perhaps behind the scenes at this point, but they are also talking to PTOs, for example, to give them a sense of what's coming, and they will be forming their school advisory groups over the coming weeks, which will help guide them in the discussions that they're having about how to use some of that new, what we're calling the RISE allocation money, to target toward investments intended to help pursue our equity mission across the district. So we've kind of talked about that in some detail at the committee before. I also, though, wanted to let folks know, particularly in this setting, that in addition to that, we are also doing a lot of what we might think of as our traditional approach to budget development. That includes just estimating the wages and benefits and the utilities and all the kind of fixed costs that we face. And another thing that we are trying to do kind of more proactively this year at Tom's direction is also develop some of our major grant budgets earlier in the process, such as our Title I, Title II, Title III grants and IDEA. So that was an area that we identified as a priority this year based on some feedback that Tom had from that he had received and that he had kind of provided as he also assessed the situation. So that's something that typically we don't talk a lot about during the budget process, and I'm sure it won't be the major focus of our process this time around, but I do think it's kind of important that we're continuing to make progress in those particular areas. And one other area that we always work on but don't spend a lot of time talking about, but I'm determined to change that at least incrementally this year, is the tech center budget. Jason and I have already begun discussions about the tech center budget, and it's important, obviously, to us not only because of Burlington Tech Center being a key component of our district's operations generally, but there's also an intersection to our general fund budget in that the district pays effectively tuition to the tech center for the students that we send to the tech center, which are the majority of the students that attend the tech center. So it's important both to the tech center to have a robust budget development process and a sound budget. It's also important to the Burlington School District's general fund budget in the same way that it would be to all of our sending communities as well. So that's something that I hope, at least in this space here at the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting, we can spend a little time talking about, because that is important work that we often don't hear about, or we just hear about in passing when we're talking about things that are more directly related to tax rate impact. So that's an update on where we stand on budget development. And then finally, I wanted to talk about a facilities issue that Marty has seen firsthand that we're experiencing at the 52 Institute Road site. So one of the challenges with buildings that are vacant or significantly underused is that they tend to attract people who want to use those spaces without getting a lot of attention paid to them, which can be in the form of vandalism or other type of kind of accessing the building in ways that they shouldn't be. We also, as folks may know, have a lot of staff who still have keys to the building. And so that presents a risk as well, because we've had people go in and out of the building apparently using the keys that they have, but not adequately securing the building upon exit. And the result, of course, is a vulnerable building, and one that presents some risk. So one of the things that Marty and I have been talking about, as well as informing Tom about, is what are the options for adding some additional security there. One option that we're going to look into is potentially just changing the locks on most of the doors so that those keys that are in circulation no longer work, and that we can better control who has access to them. And another thing that we are thinking about, and this is not a guarantee that will happen, but I felt it was worth kind of sharing with folks, so if we do something of this nature, it's not a surprise, is potentially on the north and west side of the building specifically, boarding up some of the lower windows. So I say the north and west side because those are not particularly visible to the public. We don't want to create the look of a building that's even kind of more destitute than it actually is. But at the same time, those are spaces that are not visible to the public. And as you can imagine, that makes those attractive spaces for people who want to engage with the building without being seen as doing so. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there so folks understood that that was a risk. The good news is, from a cost perspective, we can almost certainly use a little bit of the capital funds that we have dedicated to that project already for those purposes, because one of the things that we have received assurance and clarity from the city's bond council about is that we can use the money that we borrowed, that original kind of $4 million that we're using toward the building to put toward any sort of kind of capital improvement. And those capital improvements can be small things like that. They don't necessarily have to be a whole new renovation of a building, right? So we have a little bit to do to preserve the value of that asset, that's really the key element, is that we are investing in that asset, and that's what makes it eligible to be to use some of those funds. So we've got a little bit of financial flexibility there that will allow us to take some kind of prudent measures when we determine exactly what the measures are that we want to take. So let me stop there, see if Marty has anything to add, and also, of course, answer any questions about those items.
Yeah, I do have a little bit to add. So where we're seeing that we're most vulnerable is the fact that we have occupants using A building, yet we want to keep people out of B, C, D, and E, and F buildings. And as you can imagine, because those buildings are connected, we can't just simply, put up a gate or a wall or whatnot, because that's going to impact egress from one space to another. So I'm meeting with the fire marshal tomorrow to talk about how we can achieve that, so that when students are in A buildings, they're not wandering in areas that we don't want them, and or the opposite. If somebody does break into, let's say, D building, they can't get into our kitchen from there. So those are the other areas that we're going to be focusing on.
Thank you very much for those updates. Any questions for Marty or Nate at this time? We do have a tiny little bit of time. I know it's not on the agenda, but Kendra, would you be interested at all in giving a quick update on the student weighting formula?
Sure.
Don't have to, but it might be a good use of a few minutes.
Yeah, the task force has been obviously meeting this summer to look at changing and updating the education funding formula. They were called the implementation task force because a per pupil weighting study had weights that they were proposing, and the task force was supposed to be looking at those weights. And right now, the task force is it's moving away and diverting from, especially for EL, using weights, and they'd like to move to categorical aid. So we are looking at how that will impact Burlington. We're not exactly sure the impact. I don't know, Nate, if you have any updates on that, but we are running the numbers for this new modeling. We are highly concerned that it's being moved from the weights to categorical aid. So we're hoping that we can convince otherwise. There is a public hearing coming up. We're hoping that folks from Burlington will speak up loud and clear, because this is truly an equity issue. We believe that the funding formula is transparent and uses data. It's data driven, it's transparent, and it's not categorical aid makes us do a lot of administrative work, and it's up to the political whim of the legislature every year to fund it. So we really can't plan. So it's not a great update. I wish I had better news, but we are working hard to try to influence the task force to move back to what we feel are a better system, which is to use these weights. Nate, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I will just say with a big shout out to my colleague, Nicole Mace in Winooski. She did some preliminary work kind of setting up a tool to do some estimates about the impact of the categorical approach. So I have those and I have to provide her with some data back, but we are on track to get at least an estimate thanks to Nicole's help.
Great.
And categorical aid is another way of saying grants that come from the general ed fund. Is that correct?
Categorical aid is essentially, like, you may think of it almost like a block grant. That might be the easiest way to kind of describe it as a parallel. So instead of waiting students specifically. I've seen different things, and so Kendra, you may know the latest one better than I do, but what I'm familiar with is a base grant of $25,000 for every district that has an EL student, and then an additional $5,000 for every EL student enrolled in that district. So instead of waiting, you're just giving a kind of flat fee or amount associated with the raw count of those students.
That's correct. Yeah. And it's really making a separate, it's taking the EL and making them a separate category instead of just using the weights, which is how Vermont has funded. We have funded in using the education system to fund students who require different needs and different resources. So it's really, Categorical Aid is just, it's not the answer to this. So.
Thank you for the brief update on that. If there are no further questions, then I'll take a motion to adjourn at 6:27.
I'll make a motion.
And anyone want to second that motion?
You can second
Me?
it.
I'll second it. So yeah, we are adjourning at 6:27, and all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I don't think anyone's opposed. Thanks everyone for showing up tonight.
Thank you,
Okay,
guys.
thanks everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Hey, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.